This video will be looking at Chapter 17, and it's the second part of Chapter 17 on building a small network. So the first part of this will be looking at the IP configuration on a Windows host. So if you go to your Network and Sharing Center in Windows, you can view what your IP configuration is. So that would be good for viewing your address, your IP address, your default gateway, look at what servers that you're attached to. You can also use the ipconfig command, ipconfig/all. ipconfig/all shows you a little bit more, including the MAC address. You can do an ipconfig release and renew. If you're using DHCP and you need to renew your address, you can ipconfig/release will release that address, and renew will renew the address that you're using, and you should be able to see that. Now, ipconfig/display DNS that you see here displays all the cached DNS entries on that Windows computer. And then you can also view your IP configuration. So for the first time, Cisco Academy is including using Linux and Mac and how you would actually view those. So the commands are very similar. So you see the ifconfig command, and that's using Linux. And then if you're using a Mac, you can also issue the ifconfig command. And here they were actually, I believe, looking at a specific interface. Now, one of the other important commands that you'll use, probably not only in like this chapter and the module exam, would be on the Cisco certification. You may need to look at your ARP command output. So you can see the IP address and your physical address and see how they're mapped. Okay, this is the output of the ARP-A command. Now, looking at all your show commands would be recommended, and you actually have, I believe you have an exercise, a packet tracer 17.5.9 on interpreting your show commands, and I would strongly recommend that you get very comfortable looking at all your show commands, because your show commands are what you're going to use when you're troubleshooting. So not only do you have to know how to configure devices, but you need to interpret the information in your show command so that you can double check behind yourself, so that you can troubleshoot if there's an issue. So make sure you review these show commands and know which one to use when. So show run is going to show you your entire current configuration. Show interfaces will show you all the detailed information that you'd want to see about your interfaces. If you want to look just brief information, you can do a show IP interface brief. That's not listed here, but that would be one I would recommend. You can look at the layer 3 information only of an interface by using your show IP interface. Show ARP will show you the known hosts. Show IP route shows you your routing table. Show protocols shows you which protocols are being used and which ones are operational. And then your show version will show you the amount of memory on your Cisco device, the interfaces, whatever licensing information you have. Okay, all of that information will be listed there. This is your show version. Okay. So your show version, you see the various operating systems, the version number, the release number. You see the uptime on the device. You see the licensing information. You see the configuration register setting. Okay. The configuration register setting, this is the default configuration register setting for a router. So if it's not the default, that means it's booting up in a different sequence than what you're used to. So you'll want to check that. For example, if it was set to automatically bypass your NVRAM, you might see the configuration register setting set to say 2142. which means it won't be looking for the file in your NVRAM. If you'll remember that a Cisco device, when it boots up, one of the things that it looks for is the start file in your NVRAM. So when you do copy run start, whatever file is listed there is what it'll look for. But if you ever have a situation, especially if you're in a lab environment where you've saved the file doing the copy run start, but then you reboot the device and it's not finding it and it looks like a blank device, you might want to check your configuration register. The other reason why you might want to use your show version would be to see how much memory you have. So do you see how much memory you have here? So that might be a really good test question so far as how do you know if you have enough room on that particular device, on the 4321 device, to load a new operating system? Well, you would have to actually check how much memory you have. You can see the image file, okay, the flash file. Usually the .bin extension will be the actual flash image for that device. But make sure you know all of these different outputs. Okay, again, these show commands are extremely important. One that we haven't used a whole lot is the show CDP neighbors command. Show CDP neighbors command is very valuable because it will identify all the neighbors that that device knows about. These are all Cisco devices. Cisco Discovery Protocol, or CDP, is a Cisco proprietary protocol. Now, it runs at the data link layer, which means that's going to run at layer 2. So it gives you information about layer 2 of Cisco networking devices. So don't expect it to give you lots of information about PCs or anything like that because it must be a Cisco device. So if you're looking at the output from a show CDP neighbors command, you'll see that it's telling you that it is looking, okay, so this is R3, it's attached to S3 off G001. You see that it's a switch. It's a, let's see, 2960 series switch, and it's attached off port 5. If you were to use the CDP neighbors detail, it would give you even more detailed information about that. So you can see that's actually a security risk. Now, CDP is enabled by default. So one of the first things that you have to do is disable this CDP. So in order to disable it, you do that globally and you just type no CDP run. Okay, if you want to turn it off on an interface, you can do no CDP enable. Okay. And then to turn it back on, you just do the opposite without the no in front of it. So CDP enable to turn it back on. So this is your show IP interface brief. Again, this is extremely important to know. So whether you're looking at the output from a switch or from a router, it gives you the brief information about each of the devices. And ideally, you want to see an up and up if you have an interface configured. If it's not configured, you'll see it as unassigned and it's down. And that's okay if it's not configured. But if you have a cable plugged in and you have it configured, ideally, you want to see an up and up status. Now, if you're looking at this, so let's look up here at R1 and you see G00 and up. Okay, this status up means you have a cable plugged in, so that's layer 1. Your protocol would be layer 2. So you want to see both. Again, you have this packet tracer on interpreting your show command outputs. You want to make sure that you do that. That will help prepare you for not only your module exam, but it will help prepare you for the CCNA as well. So moving on to your troubleshooting to kind of wrap up this chapter, let's look at some of your methodologies. Now, basic troubleshooting approaches. Step 1, you want to identify the problem. Okay, so use some different tools to do that. But probably the most important conversation that you want to have is with the user to determine, what issues they're having, what were they doing last, what can they not do. So start asking some questions there, and then start kind of establishing some type of theory that might help with a probable cause. So a theory as to what's actually going on. Then you want to test that out. So you may want to do a couple of quick tests and then establish your plan of action and verify it. Okay. So once you do that, you want to put in some preventive measures. So if someone is having a particular problem with their device and it's something you can do as a preventive measure to help them once you solve whatever the issue is. So maybe they don't need to access a certain area. Well, you might want to, make it so they don't have access to that area, whether it be just kind of going in and turning off a couple of features if that's what it takes, or, that's where you'll use your own judgment with this. But the one important thing you'll want to do is in the step 6, do you see document your findings, actions, and outcomes? You want to document your steps, because what if this issue happens again? What if it's 2 months down the road and someone that you work with is seeing the same issue that you're having, and they mention, well, someone else had that same issue, but I don't really remember what the fix was for that. Well, if you've documented it, that person can go back and look at the research and follow through and implement the same steps to solve their issue that you used. Could really be a time saver. And if there's a pattern, then that might be something that might want to be addressed in the organization itself. Maybe a new policy or procedure or a feature turn off or on that may help in the whole organization. So some things you can resolve yourself. Some you may want to escalate or pass up the line. Usually you're going to have different tiers within your help desk or your IT department to be able to help with that. Debug command is something you'll probably use in your later Cisco courses. With your debug commands, that's pretty cool because you can see the output of everything that you're doing. For example, if you type ping, you may see the response to that, but if you type debug IP ICMP, you'll actually see every single time that packet was sent. So you're seeing the detailed behind the scenes information. For example, if you go in and configure an interface on a router, you usually see that entry pop up in your routing table, but you just see the entry there. You don't see it actually getting written to the routing table. Well, if you were doing a debug command, you would actually see that entry writing to the routing table itself. So for troubleshooting purposes, that's a really great thing. Now, what I would recommend anytime you're doing debug though, when you turn on debug, it's going to eat up a lot of resources, and sometimes your screen is going to be flying through at a rapid pace. So what I would recommend doing is to go ahead and type the command to turn it off first. So type no debug IP ICMP or undebug IP ICMP or undebug all, whatever no command you want to use. Go ahead, you want to type that, and then type the command to debug. So that way, when you get ready to turn it off, remember your last 10 commands are held in your command buffer, and you can just use your up arrow and hit enter, because you should have that no debug command as your second command. So hit up arrow a couple of times, hit enter without having to type it while stuff's flying all over your screen. So just from personal experience, I would highly recommend doing that. Now, you can usually see your command output when you're looking at your screen, doing your telnet. Okay. Now, using the terminal monitor, notice you can see a little bit more information. It'll actually display that debug output command. That's different than regular console monitor. So in your last section here, we're looking at troubleshooting scenarios. So what do you check if you're having issues? Okay. What kinds of troubleshooting things do we need to think about to help narrow down? If you're looking at a switch, and you're seeing a duplex mismatch, that's going to usually mean that one switch is set to half duplex and one is full duplex. Okay. So if you have an older device, it may be only capable of doing half duplex, but most newer devices will use half duplex. So that might be something you might want to look at. Change it so that it's the same on both. IP addressing issues. If you get an overlap in IP addresses, go in and check your addresses. Make sure that they're in the same or correct subnet, or have the correct mask. So use your show IP interface brief command, or your ipconfig or ipconfig/all on your PCs. Make sure that your IPs are in the same subnet as the default gateway. Also, you want to look at your routing table and make sure that for every single network that exists within your network, you see it in the routing table of every single device. Because no two routing tables are going to look exactly the same, you can't assume that one router has knowledge of something that the other one does, and you can't assume that there's return routes. So you want to look at each router's routing table and make sure that each router has a full knowledge of the network. For example, if there are 5 subnets located in your topology, make sure you see 5 networks located in that router's routing table. You can also troubleshoot some DNS issues. ipconfig/all will help show you your DNS servers. You can use NSLOOKUP to see those IP address and name resolutions that it knows about. Okay, notice that is done. You can do it on the computer itself. Each computer has its own, but the router will also have one itself. And notice you have another lab and packet tracer within this chapter, and that really wraps up everything from chapter 17, and not just chapter 17, but that is the last chapter within this course. So that should pull together everything that you've done. That ends this video.